you know, you, if I were running against you on the current record or the current image, I would do the same ad against you I did against Chamberlain, Charles Chamberlain, in Michigan. I said, Charles Chamberlain has been a congressman for 12 years. Let me read you a list of the things he's accomplished. No, in the 5th District, we have a race between Charles Chamberlain and Bob Carr for Congress. Charles Chamberlain has been a congressman for 12 years. Let me read you a list of the things he's accomplished. You think. Take a minute. Did I leave anything out? That's why this ad is paid for by Citizens for Bob Carr for Congress. Because and I tested it, and it was about the same rating. So I know that only 5 or 6% of the people are going to cite something back. I did a variant on that against Dick Stone in Florida. I had the same thing, and I found that only 30% knew what he'd done, and 20% of them, it was the canal, and they didn't approve of it. So it said, anything he's accomplished. Wait a minute, take a minute. You think. Did I leave anything out? Yeah, he gave away the canal. Guy shouted from without the tape. And now you don't have the canal, but you have that negative. And so we asked people, what have you done? And 1% said you fight crime. 1% said you fight the governor. 1% oil spills, which is good. 1% illegal aliens education, which is okay, and 0.5% windfall profits. 75% said no, I can't recall anything, and 13% more said I'm not sure if I can recall anything. So yeah, and I mean we got to get that fixed. High priority, and we won't lead you into saying horrible demagogic things, but for God's sakes, we got to make an impact on this electorate. And when we asked the 1 to 5 scale on you on each of those things, it's a catalog of missed opportunities. Now, thank God we have some time. We can capitalize on those opportunities. And thank God you're Attorney General, not Lieutenant Governor. We can do it without the press writing, now that he's entered the race for governor, Mark White today said, but instead we can say Attorney General Mark White today said. And we still have about 3 or 4 months that they're covering. When's filing?
February.
Yeah, so we have a couple of months before they start looking at us through sunglasses, but we've got to use that time. Okay, first we tested integrity, and 35% said you can basically believe what he says, 15% said you basically couldn't for 3-3, which is a little better than Clement's 3-2, but nothing really to write home about. By the same token, Hill on that question.
That's when we came out with this deal on Mark White's honest enough.
Yeah, that's nice. What did you say?
Oh, well, there was some comment about that in the primary, or in the general election 3 years ago. They were talking about tough Attorney General, and they were going to say Mark White's tough enough and honest enough. I said, you're either honest or you're not.
Yeah,
You're
right.
honest enough.
Right.
It's just like Ed Clark's comment about people he doesn't like too much. Says he's reasonably honest.
Well, this doesn't test honesty, it tests credibility, really. And you get a 3-3, Clemens gets a 3-2, but Hill gets a 3-4. He's 40-12 on that. You're 35-15. Clemens is 39-22.
He hadn't got the truth in.
By the same token, Briscoe is 3-0, 27-28. The real downside of that. So the integrity thing's there, but it's not what an attorney general should have. An attorney general should be, stratospheric in terms of credibility, because you don't have to do anything controversial, and you fight bad people and so on. He cares about people like me 3-5. That's as opposed to 3-3 that Clemens had. So it's a nice edge. You have 49-16. Clemens is 44-22. But in the distribution, it works out to a 2/10 thing, which is significant. More people give you a 5 than a 4 kind of thing. Hill is 3-4 on that, 42-18, about the same ballpark as you. Liberal conservative, there you get a real difference. On a scale of 1 to 5, Clements is 3.7, 58-12. You are 3.1, 27-22. So you're perceived as markedly, as a complete moderate. He's perceived as a conservative. Hill is 20% conservative, 36% liberal for a 2-8. So it's 3-7 to 3-1 to 2-8, in terms of that scale. The problem is that I think that their sense of you as a moderate is not so much a sense of you as a moderate as the absence of a sense of you as in anything. So that 60% of the people knew whether Clements was a liberal, 70% of the people knew whether Clements was a liberal or a conservative, and 56% of the people knew whether Hill was a liberal or a conservative, but only 49% of the people knew whether you were a liberal or a conservative. And I think that again reflects 66% knew whether Briscoe was. 57% knew whether Clayton was. So that I think that again we're dealing here with the absence of an image rather than with a really strongly developed image. On the other hand, you're AC/DC now. You could be whichever one you want, and you could be anything you want. I mean, the nice thing about your image is that it's virgin. You know, you could be anything. You know.
Been here for 2.5 years, nobody knew it. Except my banker.
So I think that's an opportunity. On the other hand, it's a shame that we don't have more out there at this point already. He does a lot to fight crime. You also get only a 3-5 on that, just like Clements does. You're 47-17. He's 48-21, essentially the same. And that again, I mean, for an attorney general only to get that rating on fighting crime is not good. I mean, it just isn't. And it's reflective, I think, of really an absence of an aggressive penetration of what you've done to the voters. And I think that, and I don't know what it is, I mean, I think that maybe what you're talking about are two consensus issues. They're not issues that wake anybody up. When you come out for something that everybody thinks everybody is for, nobody pays any attention. But when you come out for something that a lot of people think a lot of people oppose, then a lot of people pay attention. And I think it's awfully important. It doesn't, and the trick is to find an issue that nobody's against, but everybody thinks a lot of people are against, like spanking, you know, and really go with that kind of thing, because people think that that's very courageous, because they think a lot of people must disagree with you on that, and you poll and you find that in fact they don't disagree with you. And we should look for those kinds of issues to talk about crime rather than just, you know, I'm against criminals. And I could have cried. He does a lot to hold down utility rates. 24% say you do, 31% say you don't, for a 2.9. Now, Jesus H. Christ. I mean, you're the Attorney General. You don't set rates. You don't have any responsibility at all. You can do whatever you like. You can make any comment you like. And it's opposed to traditionally fights, you know, that kind of thing, where Hill made a great rep for doing that. And it just isn't there. In fact, the opposite is there. 26-26 for a 3-1. You're 2-9. Clements is 2-7. So he's better than you on that. He's nothing to write home about at all anyway.
Hill was as high a profile as you can get on the issue.
Yeah. Well, it's
Of course,
4
it
years ago.
failed
Yeah.
Somewhat, but God, if you knew what the
Yeah.
Supreme Court did to him.
But still, it's 4 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
And rates have gone up a lot, and they're probably talking more in the present tense than the past tense, and in the last 3 years he hasn't done a lot to fight utility rates. So the question is phrased in the present tense. So, you know, it just is bad that it's not out there for you, because it's a real vulnerability on Clements's part that we should be exploiting and striking and building, rather than have it a vulnerability on our part, for God's sakes. He does a lot to reduce government spending. 22 say you do, 25 say you don't, for a 3-0. Again, an absolutely middle-of-the-road, moderate image. So Clements is 41-22, we're 22-25. So he's significantly got that issue over us.
Yeah, well, that's an issue that we obviously don't have any room to speak to. So.
Well, my worry,
No, they've got that fixed where I don't, too.
my worry about that is that he could really paint you as too much of a big spender. On the other hand, taxes.
Well, the painting on that is the facts are simply that he's signed the biggest appropriations act 2 years in a row.
Right. Well, I think also the fact is that he really hasn't done his homework in terms of image. And also, taxes are just not that important an issue in the state. Just because they are nationally doesn't mean they are in the state, and we'll get to that later. He does a lot to hold down taxes. 20% say you do, 32% say you don't. Again, not a great thing. On Clements, on the same question, is 39 say he does, 24 say he doesn't. He's beholden to oil companies. 17% say you are beholden, 49% say you're not. So at last we have a real significant difference between you and Clements. In other words, Clements is 49-18, he is, you're 17-49, you're not, the exact opposite. You're a 2-4, he's a 3-5, a tremendous difference. So that's a beautiful one. I mean, that works, and as long as that works, we can make the utilities work, down the road because of the connection there. But so at least it gives us something to anchor on. But
$50 campaign. It's sure gonna be a $50 person campaign.
but I think that there at least is that for you to hang on to. He's generally pro-abortion. 14% say you are, 17% say you're not, 47% aren't sure, 21% give you a 3. Again, you're not perceived one way or another on that kind of social issue.
Duck that one purposely.
He does a lot to improve education. 42% say you do, 22% say you don't, for a 3.4, which is good. So whereas Clements is 39-30, you're 41-22. Not as much room as I'd like, 3-1 to 3-4, but at least there's some room there, and at least we can use that and use it effectively. Hill, on the other hand, is much stronger. He's 49-12 for 3-6. So Hill is 3-6, we're 3-4, Clements is 3-1. But I think there are ways that we could handle that and we could close that gap. I have some very specific thoughts on that. He does a lot to hold down interest rates. Exact same rating as Clements at 2.9. 21 say you do, 29 say you don't. And with Clements, 29 say he does, 33 say he doesn't.
You just
So-
gotta be in the room when something happens, they got you just like,
So the important point here is that again, the negatives that Clements has, interest rates, utilities, we're not in a position to exploit because we haven't done our homework on it. And if we come on the air 4 weeks before the election with an ad that says, Mark White will hold down interest rates, the voter's going to yell bullshit back at the television set. He's been Attorney General for 4 years. What the hell has he ever done about interest rates? In fact, on balance, I think he probably hasn't done anything on holding down interest rates. So it's terribly important to make this candidacy work. In fact, the next 3 months are more important to your candidacy than the last 3 months are before the election to a certain extent, because they're just pivotal for you to shape your image while you're Attorney General before you really are seen as a candidate for governor. And
What can you do to hold down interest rates as Attorney General? Isn't that a problem?
he can issue statements. He can attack the thing. He can or find banks that are gouging people or launch an investigation. I mean,
It's hard to find a violation of law when Clements raised interest rates.
you can always investigate. You can issue a report that shows that Texas's law is worse than any other state. You can hold a press
I'm out for
conference
reducing
attacking it.
interest rates.
Yeah. In other words, he has.
That'll be-
We're down to
In other words, he-
$25 a contribution now.
In other words, you have. Yeah, but wait a minute. Come on.
Be a press
Clements.
campaign.
I think we just lost Temple.
Clements is an awfully vulnerable candidate, and there's no way that an incumbent governor of a large state who's hovering in the high 40s in terms of percent of the vote is going to be able to monopolize money. I mean, there's going to be hedge money out there. There are going to be people who want to be close to the governor of Texas and are scared to death that Clements isn't going to get reelected, even if they want him to get reelected. And the environment we're talking about is you against Hill. And in that kind of environment, there'll be a hell of a lot of issues we can structure, which will give us access to money. And there are a lot of ways we can tap into interest rates and oil and that stuff and utilities without necessarily offending everybody. We'll offend a lot of people. We'll offend some money. But we don't need all the money in the world. We'd like to have if you raise, in your primary you raised, I think, 700 last time. In the general you raised 1.2. If you increase that by like 200 or 300,000 per race, for governor as opposed to attorney general, as an incumbent AG running against a vulnerable governor, that's all the money we need. We don't need $8 million and, kind of thing.
Why? Because when we have one ad, he's gonna have 10.
Yeah, but the important thing is not the quantity of the ads. The important thing is the extent to which they really are aimed at the vote and the extent to which they really are hitting the voter. Also, he can't have 10 to R1 because it's illegal. Stations won't sell you that much time. In the last 4 or 5 weeks, he'll have 1.5 to R1 or 1.3 to R1. His literature will be on parchment and ours will be on paper. He'll have sky writings, he'll have Sunday supplements, he'll have phone banks, he'll have all that stuff. But in the crucial thing, which is the electronic media for communicating with people, the voters will hear our ads every day in the last 2 weeks, and they'll hear his ads 3 times every 2 days. And that doesn't make a heck of a lot of difference. The important thing is what do they say.
But he's gonna have a poll, and he's gonna know what our weaknesses are, and he's gonna know.
We don't have any
weaknesses
weaknesses. We don't have any weaknesses. Our weaknesses are that we don't have strengths, but we can build those strengths in. There's nothing in this image that you can get hit with. We don't have anything that he can hit us with. And where he's strong on the flip side. And he's not, and he can't change his image completely. He can't suddenly pick on oil companies. He can't suddenly go after utility companies. He can't all of a sudden say he's for major increases in teachers' salaries. I mean, he can't, his feet are nailed to the floor by what he's been and what he is and his contributions and his political base. And he can't say, I didn't raise interest rates. You know, I mean, his feet are in clay. We are completely mobile because of the absence of perception of our record. We can be anywhere we need to be once. We can't move once we take the posture. And he's absolutely nailed into cement. And we don't have negatives. In other words, if once we win this election, we're going to stay ahead. I'm a Yankee fan. We have Goose Gossage in the bullpen. Go into the seventh inning with a lead and you'll win this election because you don't have negatives that he can hit you with. The important point is to go into the seventh inning with a lead. And that's what we have to do in terms of this issue posturing. And it's fine. You're the Attorney General. There aren't negatives on you in this stuff. You just don't have positives. So create some positives and start structuring some issues. And do it in two contexts. One is as Attorney General, and the other is as a statewide elected official in Texas with a big mouth. You know, and access to the newspapers. You can, or a potential candidate for governor. I mean, you can issue statements on almost anything you like.
For instance, on the interest rate thing, I think that might be an issue of what you would do next year is to, you know, you look at the return on equity or whatever on a bank, and you can just show that they've just got out the roof.
Yeah.
And make that next year, we're
Sure.
going to call for the reduction in interest rates
Sure.
to certain levels.
And issue a press or issue a study. You know, have your staff go around to 49 other states and issue a study like
I
that.
have in my check.
You know, when you do that.
Severance taxes are beginning to look better and
Yeah,
better.
but
No,
he
they're
says
not.
the polls don't look worth a
They're
damn,
not.
because they always
Really?
react to
I'll come.
increased tax.
No, it's not that. It's that they think their fuel bills will go up from it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
But I'll get to that in a sec. But there's a lot without that we could do. White is too ambitious. 30% say you are, 28% say you're not. But of the people that say you are too ambitious, you win 40% of their votes, whereas you're only winning 36% of the votes generally. So it doesn't hurt you to be seen as too ambitious. If you don't build some substance into your image, the ambition will hurt you, because then it's just careerism, putting yourself ahead and stuff. But once you build substance in, that isn't going to hurt you. He unfairly criticizes the governor. 31% say you do unfairly criticize the governor, and 29% feel you don't unfairly criticize the governor. And here it hurts you. You only get the votes of about 30% of the people who feel you unfairly criticize the governor. And I think that the key word there is unfairly. Hi. How are you?
But couldn't that work just the opposite? If they don't like him, they think his criticism is unfair? In other words, the fact they don't vote
Yeah.
against him isn't necessarily the result of that
Well,
feeling.
very few people dislike Mark White in that sense. Very few people dislike him. It is possible that if they're for Clements, that they react that way. But I think the key word there is unfair, because there isn't enough substance there. In other words, if they perceived you as fighting him over utility rates, that wouldn't be an unfair criticism. But if they perceive you as fighting with the governor and they don't really know about what, that then is perceived as unfair. The important point is not to stop fighting with him, but to fight with him over stuff that really matters in that sense. He fought hard to reduce the cost of electricity in Texas by fighting against the Montana severance tax on coal. Only 36% of the people that know you know that, and 21% think it's not true of the people that know you. So that again, you're known by only 50% of the voters, and only 18% of the state, less than 1 in 5, knows that, and that's the most important fact about you. And in fact, when we asked people open-ended about your accomplishments or achievements, nobody cited that at all, you know, in the thing.
Well, it
So,
may be just as well, since
That's
that's
right.
the way it ended.
but I mean, I think that's a point about, in other words, you feel you're talking to people, but you're not. You know, you're more talking to yourself in a way, and I just think it's really important. I don't mean to beat you up about it, but
Except that was an effective ad during the last election. And,
yeah, but
and
you ran
had
it for
an
only
impact.
you ran it for how many weeks? 3
Mhm.
weeks. So 21 days worth of advertising. Expect people to know 4 years later. You know, they're not going to remember that.
It worked for me.
Yeah, they held the election on Election Day. He puts the need to protect the way of life in Texas ahead of the need to attract new people and new jobs to the state. On that question, you got a 3-3. Clement's got a 3-2, so you're about the same. You're 33-16. He's 38-23. About the same kind of thing. So that when you look at that image, it just isn't forceful enough. There just isn't enough out there, and it becomes so crucial that we really use Clement's negatives against him. On the other hand, the beautiful news is that you don't have any crippling disease. There's nothing that they can throw at you. And there's a lot out there to be made. There's a lot of issues to be used. So all we need to do is to win this election, is structure an affirmative campaign to move into first place. And then once you're in first place, you're going to stay there, because there just is not a lot that even the most vicious smear artist can do to really take you apart. And I think that just is awfully important in this thing. Now, let me spend a little bit of I did a little bit on Clayton. I gather since he's not really running, it's not that important. He was seen, the number one adjective people said about him was honest, 6%, nice guy, 6%, dishonest, 5%, untrustworthy, sneaky, 5%, for Texas, 4%, a good politician, 4%, ambitious, 3%, intelligent, 3%, does his best, 3%, for the people, 3%, hard worker, 3%, took kickbacks, 2%, got into big trouble, 1%, powerful, aggressive, 2%, would be a good governor, 2%, all right, okay, 1%, friendly, 1%, middle of the road, 1%, acquitted, 1%. The point is that while on balance he has a positive image, the negative of dishonest and kickbacks and all that is out there. About 15% of the voters mentioned it. And once that's out there to that extent, it's just a matter of time. It's like saying that, the prairie fire has only taken 10 acres so far, but it's dry and it's blazing. And, just get into a campaign and it'll be all over the place. If he runs for governor, I would not worry about it. I would hope that he would run, in a sense. His favorable rating isn't bad. He's known by 55% of the voters, about the same as you. He has 75% that like him. You have 84% that like you. But he doesn't really, and he does okay in terms of the votes, but there just is that negative on him, which would be consuming in the event that he ultimately got into the election. And it really isn't counterbalanced by any strong positives that he has. His credibility, 36% would believe him, 24% wouldn't. He has a problem waiting to happen, in a sense. Now, Briscoe, who I gather might well run in this. Briscoe is known by 82% of the voters, and he gets favorable ratings from 71% of the people that know him, as opposed to 84%, which you get. All told, 46% of the people could cite something about him that they liked, but 37% could cite something about him that they disliked. And the likes and dislikes, whereas the dislikes of you tended to be mainly your lack of visibility, the dislikes of him tended to be fairly strong. So that when they were asked to describe Briscoe, they said, I'll give you these in order. They said, good man, 14%, was a good governor, 13%, fair, 7%, tried to do good for the common man, 7%, honest, 5%, I just dislike him, 5%, too conservative, 5%, did nothing, I'll read the negatives first, did nothing for Texas, 3%, dishonest, 1%, his wife was the power behind him, 1%, egotistical, 1%.
Those are open-ended questions.
Yeah, those are the responses, right. The positives were good man, 14, good governor, 13, fair, 7, tried to do good for the common man, 7, honest, 5, I'm sorry, as a negative, not for the people, 2, did the best he could, 2, hard-working, 2, didn't keep his campaign promises, 1, incompetent, 1, only for one strata and one economic group, 1, a good leader, 1, a has-been, 1%, outspoken, 1%, didn't do a good job 1%, an opportunist 1%, a Democrat 1%, just for the rich and the wealthy 1%. So there's a vein that really runs through his image of not for the common person, didn't keep his campaign promises, incompetent, for one economic group, just for the rich, too conservative, didn't do much for the state, kind of thing. So that really, while he has an overall somewhat positive image as governor, it's deeply flawed by a real perception of class consciousness, a real perception of just a failure to really do stuff for the common man, and a real kind of Tory image, in a sense, that you have. Is he a kind of aloof guy and egotistical and stuff?
Not so egotistical, just so low.
Yeah.
He dodges the press every day.
Yeah. There's a great ad that Pat Moynihan did against Jim Buckley. We did Moynihan's campaign that was where he had ratings very much like that, and he said, New York is one of only 7 states that doesn't have how he speaks, that doesn't have a Democratic senator. Not a Democrat to fight for us, not a Democrat to work for us. Buckley doesn't fight for us. Sometimes you get the feeling he doesn't even like us. And I and that kind of thing really comes through in that image. It's rare that you get so many things that are so focused really on a sense of just not being connected with the average person. And then the bottom line, we said, to what extent is it true that he cares about people like me? 37% felt he did, 29% felt he didn't, for a 3.1. By the same token, we had 49% to 16. So we're 49-16, he's 37 to 29. And when you break that down by social group, people who well, interestingly, I guess for some reason, people who make less. That's too small a sample size. People who are middle or low income people, 31% said he cared about them. 36% said that he didn't. In that, so it does tend to break down along those kinds of class lines. And I just feel that the problem is that there's that class consciousness about him that I think really would work against him. When we asked people on balance, what kind of a job do you think he did as governor? 24% said he did an above average or excellent job. 40% said he did an average job, and 26% said he did a below average or poor job. So whereas Clement's job rating is 33 to 14, his job rating is 24 to 26. Really scarcely a mandate for re-election. I don't know if you wanted to, if he polls, it would be hard to see how he could justify getting into a race. He would have a lot of negatives on him. I don't know, are you friendly with him?
Yeah.
Would he talk with you before he runs or stuff?
He said he would.
Yeah, because if he saw this data, it would be hard for me to imagine how he
What was
could
the
run.
number of people that didn't believe anything he said?
Yeah, well, we asked credibility, right.
Yeah.
We asked that, and 27% said you could believe what he says, 28% said you couldn't.
Well, I don't know, maybe I'll go ask him again.
I'm kind of undecided on that issue.
So when you look at the potential characters in this race, Hill is believed by 40 to 12, White is believed by 35-15, Clements is believed by 39-22, and Briscoe is believed 27 to 28.
He's
so
unbelievable.
Unbelievable, right? So in other words, you can, in a sense, you really could do the kind of an ad against him where you'd sort of say, well, Dolph Briscoe's running for governor of Texas again, and he says he's going to cut your taxes, and he says he's going to fight inflation, and he says he's going to stand up for the common guy. But do you believe him? That's why this ad is paid for by Citizens for Mark White for governor. There would just be that, it would strike that kind of chord. When a politician gets these kinds of credibility ratings, it means that he's not a credible source of information about himself. It means that whatever he says about himself doesn't work, in a sense. And that just takes his 1% in a crowded field, you get 11% in a crowded field. In other words, the ultimate field was 23 for Briscoe, 21 for Hill, 12 for Clayton, 11 for White, and McKnight and Temple 1 or 1% each. So that essentially he really is twice as able to convert his name recognition into vote as you are. Now, I'm not all that worried about Hill. Hill.
You said a minute ago you quoted a believability.
Oh, yeah.
of
Yeah.
40-12.
On Hill, right.
Yeah.
So in other words, Briscoe I'm not really worried about. If he came into the race and he was your major opponent, it would be fairly easy to knock him apart. On the other hand, and Clayton I'm not worried about at all, because he would be just in horrible shape if he came into the race. On the other hand, Hill is a serious opponent. In fact, on balance, I think you would have a harder time beating Hill than beating Clements. On the other hand, I think it's possible to beat both of them, and I don't think beating either of them will be all that insurmountable a task. But he has to be taken extraordinarily seriously. When we asked people overall what they thought of Hill, he had a good basic rating. He was known by 55%, with 74% of them saying that they liked him. You had 84. But he had 1 out of 6 of the people that liked him saying he was one of the best, whereas you only had 1 out of 15 in the primary of the people that liked you saying you were one of the best. By the way, when I quote data on Hill, Briscoe, Clayton, McKnight, or Temple, I'm speaking only of primary voters. With you, I can cite either, and with Clements, I'm only speaking, of course, of general election voters. All told, when we asked people, and against Clements, he runs about the same as you. He's 47-39, you're 47-36 against Clements. When we asked people, what do you like or dislike about him? 50% of those who knew him were able to cite a like, but 41%, a fairly high number, were able to cite a dislike of John Hill. And the likes were as follows. Pro-education, 6%. Honest, 5%. But to have an issue right up there as the number one thing really is important. It shows that he just took a bath in that issue and was incredibly immersed in it, and even 4 years later, it's very essential to his image. So 6% pro-education, 5% honest.
You say that the fact that honesty is an issue is that high?
Well, only
Yeah,
5%.
favorable, honest issue.
Yeah, only 5% open-ended said they liked the fact that he was honest about him. That's not all that great a rating. Honest is usually the number one thing they say about
Were
you.
you speaking of the education response as being showing him
Yes.
immersed in a single issue?
Yes,
Yeah.
of education. And
Teach a lot.
that's a very high ratio for him. Straightforward, 3%. Good man, 3%. Good politician, 3%. Fair, 2%. Knowledgeable, 2%. Good personality, 2%, and then small numbers. Intelligent, tries to do his best for the people, helps the people, was a good attorney general for the common man, for teachers' rights. All told, 7% of the people said they liked him because of something related to education when you add up all those education responses. What don't you like about Hill? Liberal, 4%. Overly ambitious, 2%. Lost the last election, 2%.
That's what I didn't like about it.
Dislike his stands on teachers' issues, 1%, and then small numbers, not a good speaker, politically motivated, wishy-washy, hasn't had enough exposure, hasn't accomplished anything. So that the negatives on him basically are all in terms of the liberal-conservative trade-off. And then when you ask people, is he a liberal or is he a conservative, 20% think he's a conservative and 36% think he's a liberal. So that he really is way over left in terms of people's perceptions. You have a moderate, a left-winger, and a right-winger in terms of you and Hill and Clements. And also Briscoe, really, in terms of that. Briscoe, on a liberal-conservative scale, I forgot to mention, was 44-22 conservative. Clements was 58-12 conservative. So he's really getting up there with Clements. You're 27-22, and Hill is 20-36 the other way. So that Hill has really positioned himself very far to the left in terms of this electorate. And among conservatives, the perception of him as a liberal was 28-28. Conservatives split evenly on the question of whether Hill was a liberal. And generally people, if they like you, tend to think you think like them, so they sort of have to go out of their way to reach over and find him as a conservative. and moderates felt he was a liberal by 41 to 14. You know, a very strong kind of response.
Conservatives have come out that close to an even split.
Well, because they don't hate him. It's not a strident dislike of him. It's to get an even split among people saying that you're something that they're not is bad. I mean, generally people, if they like you, as they generally like Hill, give you the benefit of the doubt. On the other hand, he is pretty well liked. You know, I mean, and your point is right, that he's not perceived as being, he's not hated for his liberalism by conservatives, okay? In other words, he's not, it's not the same kind of thing as they might respond to George McGovern, for example, you know, kind of thing. Credibility, he has enormous credibility. 40% felt you could believe what he said, and 12% felt you couldn't, you know, which is really great. In fact, of all of the characters running in this election or thinking of running, he has the highest credibility rating by a long shot. He's 40 to 12, we're 35-15, and then comes Clements 39-22, Clayton 36-24, and Briscoe 27-28. So the credibility is a really strong suit for him. And he's perceived also very much as caring about people like me, 42 to 18 for a 3-4. That's about the same as our 47, that's about the same as our 49-16. So we're a little bit more caring than he is, but in a sense. But he also really makes that issue work for him in a meaningful kind of way. We tested he does a lot to fight crime. 42 to 21, he gets that issue for a 3-4 by about the same ratio we do. So that his liberalism does not articulate itself as being soft on crime. In other words, there he succeeds in making himself a conservative in terms of fighting crime, which will help him a lot. He does a lot to hold down utility rates. Now here he gets a 26-26, which, as you point out, is not astonishing. You know, it's not an amazing rate, even though he had a high profile, and it's unusual that it be that split. So we could take that issue away from him. In other words, we could flank him on utility rates. There's no reason why, especially since we're the Attorney General and he's not.
The only way, and this is so frustrating because we can't show decisive victories anywhere along here. It's just kind of been a delaying action more than anything else. And we've been running some totals on how much they asked for, and had it not been for our fight, how much they would have gotten.
Well, we have to sit. I would like to come back here in relatively soon, like the next week or the week after, and kind of sit with you and go through the mandates that come out of this poll and figure out just how to do it. Like for example, the next time a rate increase is filed, you know, hold a press conference denouncing it, you know, or maybe we could talk about suing the Public Service Commission to enjoin them from raising rates.
So, you know, he did that.
Yeah.
And got great credit for it, and the Supreme Court in a 9-0 opinion said he can't do that.
Yeah, right. Sure.
You represent your public
We're
utilities.
statutorily required to represent them, and they cannot get anyone else to represent.
Yeah.
The
Well,
commission's gonna raise the rate.
so we have to figure out a way to use that issue, and if 49 other attorneys general can, you can. There has to be a way to do it, and
Maybe we run on some statutory change that's required to do something.
or you do press conferences about it, or you just attack the utilities, or you call for a ban on utility advertising, you know, or you call for a ban on utility campaign contributions, or you.
Carol Irwin ought to be
What?
very helpful in that whole area.
Yeah.
There are millions of things you can do on that, and I think that what we should do is meet with some utility people and, you know, some utility people from your office and try to figure out what's coming down the pike and what we could do on that. But you can flank Hill to the left on that issue. He's done a lot to reduce government spending. He does a lot to reduce government spending. He gets that issue, 31-22. So he is not perceived as being bad on that issue. So his liberalism sort of exempts him from that. He does a lot to hold down taxes. 22 said he did, 30 said he didn't. So that's a negative, as it is for Clements
Same for us,
and
yeah.
for you. Right. Beholden to oil companies, 22% say he is, 33% say he's not.
I'm a little better.
You're better. You're much better than he. You're 49-17. He's 33-22. I don't know why he should be closer to oil companies than you, but for some reason you were really seen as very independent.
He has more money.
But you are perceived as much more independent. And
You just have to conclusion that people's opinions aren't based on reality, but if they hold the opinions, that's what you have to work with.
Yeah, what I'm sort of trying to do here is to create a new baseline reality. I mean, who cares what the reality is? What I'm trying to do is to ask all of you to clean your mind and readjust it to this reality, because this is reality, and then why isn't terribly important. Just this opens up certain opportunities for us that we ought to exploit, and who cares why they came about, in a sense. He's generally pro-abortion. 17 say he is, 19 say he isn't. There's still that confusion about him as well as everybody else.
Everybody else is right floating along on that same point, aren't they?
Yes. And then he does a lot to improve education. He gets that 49 to 12, which is better than our 41-22 and a lot better than Clement's 39-30. But I think we can make that work against him, and when we get to the issue section, I have some thoughts on that. He's a fighter for the common man, 41-22. He gets that, but that would be a nice give-me adjective. You know, I mean, you could sort of say that really easily about a guy, and they sort of resist saying that about him. You only get 41% that say that about him. So I think the populist bloom is off the rose to a certain extent in terms of him. He gets tepid ratings on utilities. He's seen as liberal, but tepid ratings on utilities, mediocre ratings on fighting for the common man, and only really strong ratings on something like fighting for education, which is clearly a single issue that he had made his own. So in Hill, we have a guy who is really Mr. Education, Mr. Liberal, not Mr. Utility Rates, and not Mr. Fights Oil Companies, and not Mr. Populist, but education and liberalism in terms of the image the guy has.
How did he get education?
Teachers. Yeah. I don't know how he got it, but he got it. He has 49 say he is, 12 say he's not, and 7% open-ended say that about him, which is a lot. So clearly he's got education. It is the image. And again, I'm just asking you to, readjust your baseline reality to see that it's there. I don't know. I mean, he could have run more ads on education in the election than anything else. I think often we tend to look too much at the facts, and the voters look at television. So I don't know what he said in his ads that might have created that. So then, when we ask people who they would vote for in the primary if it were held tomorrow, we have Briscoe in first place at 23%, Hill in second place at 21%, Clayton in third place at 12%, White in fourth place at 11%, Buddy Temple at 3%, and Peyton McKnight at 1%.
Briscoe leading Hill?
Yeah, by 1 or 2%. That's really a statistical tie. The point is that they're at about 20 and we're at about 10 or 11. But 30% of the vote is not sure, so the election is very premature in terms of its being held. I think the important point is that we are not able yet to convert our name recognition or our favorability into electoral support, and that's because they like you a little, but nobody likes you a lot. And when you dangle other names in front of them, like a Briscoe, who some know as having been a good governor, and a Hill, who with education and stuff, and a Clayton in terms of a geographic area, you really get into a situation where they run awfully well against you. And that is, again, the central mandate of this survey, which is for you to harden up that image and make it far more relevant to issues. Ultimately, Hill can be beaten because he's too liberal and because his education position is going to lead him to walk off a pier, and we'll talk about that in half an hour. And Briscoe can be beaten because of the credibility problem and his record as governor. But so that these guys can be had in the primary. But you're not yet in a position to beat them. We've got to get you into a position to beat them, but that shouldn't be hard. I mean, after all, Briscoe has 82% recognition, okay, and he still is getting 23% of the vote. That means that man will never get more than 23% of the vote, whatever happens in a Democratic primary, because they all know, I mean, 3/4 of the people that know him are deciding not to vote for him. And in most, and I'll bet that of the voters that vote for him, a hell of a lot of them don't know any of the other names. That's why they're voting for him, because he's the only guy in this field with significant name recognition. So in a sense, he's converting 1 out of 4 of the people that know him to vote for him. We also are only converting 1 out of 4 of the people, 1 out of 5 of the people that know us to vote for us. Hill, on the other hand, is converting 2 out of 5 of the people that know him to vote for him, and therefore he really, at this point, is the guy to beat in that situation. On the other hand, he's vulnerable and he's beatable, And enough of the vote is undecided so that when you trot a guy with 50% recognition, a guy with 55% recognition, a guy with 82% recognition, and another guy with 55% recognition in front of the voters, 30% of them say, I'm not sure. Which really means that none of these people grab you. I mean, these people are not, none of them are really flipping out. Now, geographically, Hill runs a bit stronger in Houston than in the rest of the state, but not a lot stronger. He gets 26% of the vote in Houston and about 21% every place else, so there's not a huge geographic spread. Briscoe does a little bit better in San Antonio and some of the rural areas than he does in some of the city areas, but that again is not an enormous spread. And you run a little weaker in San Antonio and Dallas, a little stronger in Houston, and a little stronger in the outstate, more rural areas than you do, in Dallas. But the point is that none of these people is a geographic turn-on, okay? None of these people has, I have Dallas, I represented it in Congress for 22 years, and I know everybody there, and I've been to every wedding and every wake, and, I've got Dallas. And that doesn't happen here. And you also really don't have a situation in which anybody clearly gets ethnic vote. The black vote, for example, the black vote splits. Briscoe gets 29 because he's better known. Hill gets 29. You get 13. Clayton gets 7. 23 are not sure. The Hispanic vote polarizes just about evenly. The Catholic vote...
What's Hispanic vote there?
Well, I don't have enough interviews to be really certain about that. I mean, I have it as about 32 for Briscoe, 28 for Hill, 20 for you, but that's 1 or 2 votes difference. The point is that if all the Hispanics were voting for one, I'd have enough interviews to know that, but they're not. And Catholics, Hill would appear to have a slight lead among Catholics, but he gets 30% of the Catholic vote, but 70% goes elsewhere, so that you don't have geographic polarization, and you don't and you really don't have ethnic or demographic polarization. And in terms of ideology, Hill is perceived as a liberal, but he only gets 27% of the liberal vote. Briscoe gets 23% of the liberal vote. Clayton gets 14. You get 8. You are perceived as Briscoe is perceived as more conservative, but he only gets 20% of the conservative vote. You get 12, Hill gets 14, Clayton gets 12. So that this race is really not polarized demographically or ideologically or geographically. And only 70% of the voters are voting. 30% haven't made up their minds. All of these people will vote. This is likely voters, so that those are ultimately going to be factored in. So this primary is completely up in the air. It could go anyway. Anybody could win this primary. Nobody starts off with a strong lead. Nobody starts off with a strong base. Hill is doing the best job of converting his name rec into vote, but he has negatives that ultimately could really tear him apart. And you, unique among this field, have no negatives. Nobody can lay a glove on you. Nobody could say anything about you.
Nobody likes you very much, but they don't hate you.
Right. The only thing they could say about you is he doesn't stand for anything, and he hasn't done anything. And they could say that about you, and we have to stop them from saying that about
What have you
you.
been doing all this time?
I don't think he's been at work. He tells you every day he goes to the office. If I were you, I'd get somebody on him. I don't think he...
I go to every country club and rodeo and, I mean.
I think
That
of all
10%
these.
that knew me.
Yeah.
Did you, in this work, did you do any looking if for one reason they didn't have one of those people in the race, where those
Yeah.
people would go?
Yep, well, not quite in that sense, but yeah, I ran a couple of two-way fields against them. In a primary of White against Hill, a two-way primary, Hill gets 44, White gets 31. Largely meaningless because only half the voters know each of you, so a lot of them are voting, between, two names they never heard of, kind of thing. That was the only other matchup I did, I'm sorry. But I don't think that it's that significant at this point. The people who are voting for Clayton are voting for him because that's where they live. It's his district. He gets, his district is, no, I'm sorry, that's not the right banner.
I was just trying to see if we had any indication.
I guess his district is like Amarillo or something? Or?
Yeah, West
Yeah,
Texas.
right, so he gets 38% of the vote there, right? And then that's 1 out of every 7 of the people that vote for him, and it's only 1 out of every 20 of the votes in the state. So, I mean, there really isn't a Hill vote or a White vote or a Briscoe vote. A bunch of names are thrown up to the voters, and based on mild popularity preferences, they're expressing themselves. What you look for to determine the solidity of a primary vote is, does it polarize along rational lines? Do we get the poor people and he gets the rich people? We get the liberals and he gets the conservatives. We get the Irish and he gets the Italians, and the other guy gets the blacks and the other one gets the Hispanics. And we get Dallas and he gets Houston and he gets San Antonio. That isn't happening here. So that you're not dealing with a skew, you're not dealing with a vote distribution that means anything right now. The vote essentially is 0 to 0 to 0 to 0 to 0 with 100% undecided, more or less. I mean, you maybe have 20 or 30% of these voters that know the names and have made a decision and aren't going to be moved off, and 80% could be moved off. 30% of them manifest that by saying they're undecided, but most of these people are undecided. The point is that you have to look at the image and see, when all this comes to the fore, what's going to happen. And ultimately, Hill can't stop being a liberal, and Briscoe can't stop having been a rotten governor, but we can stop not standing for anything. I mean, our illness is curable. His illnesses are not. Now,
Armstrong is saying that
yeah, that would certainly help.
I don't believe that.
Now, let me proceed to the issue stuff, because that really is awfully important in this situation. We asked people, how likely would you be to vote for someone who advocated the use of wiretapping to catch drug pushers? And they liked that by 64 to 21. But I don't think anybody's against that, really, unless we can trap Hill into being against it. But I don't think he'll be that dumb. So I don't really think that's...
No, he did it.
What?
He did it when he was Attorney General.
He wiretapped, yeah. So, I mean, I think we have to stop talking about motherhood and apple pie issues, and that really is a motherhood and apple pie issue in this state, and we're not going to trap anybody on the wrong side of it, so it doesn't do us any good. He advocated impeachment of William Wayne Justice. 25% would be more likely to vote for such a guy, and 18% less likely, and 60% wouldn't give a damn. So, that is not an issue.
Guess where William Wayne Justice fell on that.
Yeah. Just is not an issue. I mean, yeah, he's more disliked than liked, but only marginally, and just doesn't do you anything. And 60% of the voters yawn when they hear that. 31% aren't sure, and 27% give it a 3 on a 1 to 5 scale of likelihood. So just forget that. It doesn't work.
Barnes was wrong again.
Supports legislation to let banks charge higher interest rates. 13% more likely to vote for such a guy, and 67% less likely.
Jesus Christ.
And on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 meaning much less likely,
Now, what is that again?
Interest rates.
it's interest rate. And on a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 meaning much less likely, going way overboard, 55% are much less likely to vote for someone that supports that. And when you look at it in terms of the demographics,
They hate bankers and lawyers.
it cuts across every boundary you can think of. Rich people would be less likely to vote for someone who advocated bank interest rates by 66 to 16. Conservatives would be less likely to vote for such a character by 64 to 14. So, it just works beautifully. I mean, it's an issue where there are no conservatives.
See the bankers, the bank directors.
Yeah. So,
But you can defeat,
So there-
you can defeat an overwhelming majority of the legislature on that. And the
You sure
governor
can.
who signed it.
Yeah,
and the
you
governor
sure
who
can.
signed it.
You sure can. And it's an issue where it's not a liberal or a conservative issue. There are no conservatives on this issue. Conservatives break 64-13, liberals break 71-12. No difference on that issue at all. There are no Democrats or Republicans on that issue. Republicans break 66-14, Democrats 70-14. Complete cuts across.
There are a hell of a lot more borrowers than there are
Then we-
lenders.
Then we said, how about, and then we asked people, we asked people, how high do you think interest rates are in the state? Too high, 80%. Just about right, 14, and too low, 12.
God, there's
Now-
12% of our lenders.
So it's 80 to 14 to 2. On taxes, it's 37 to 50 to 8. Too high, just about right, too low.
That issue ain't here yet.
So taxes are
That issue ain't
37,
here yet, though.
37, 50, 8. Interest rates are 80, 14, 2.
That would be one to keep in there though, after the
You-
board starts
yeah.
And
sending out.
people have not been
Reappraisal
informed
notices.
as the impact of the reform.
Of the tax reform, no,
They haven't
right,
gotten the bill
that's
for
true.
it yet.
We'll come to
They're
that in a
getting the
second.
interest bill
Right.
now.
Utility rates, 71% said they were too high. Insurance rates, 69% said they were too high, but interest rates, 80% said were too high. So, one hell of an issue.
What was insurance rate?
69. A great issue, too, but interest rates are just an unbelievable issue. Likelihood of voting for a candidate who was a railroad commissioner, Temple, I guess, 19 more likely, 35 less likely. It hurts you to be a railroad commissioner in the state. Yeah, or whatever.
Or a railroad?
How about a candidate for governor who headed a major oil company? 20% more likely to vote for such a guy, 53% less likely to vote for such a guy. So the oil identification in Texas, oil-producing state, hurts. And among rich people, it hurts 45 to 22, and among conservatives, it hurts 40 to 28.
That's probably a big oil.
And among Republicans, it helps 31-27, but a complete, just about an even split. Well, Sedco isn't exactly tiny, so I mean, it's that identification. I mean, oil. That's a great way of measuring the popularity of the industry, and it is not very popular in the state. And don't forget, we're speaking about an incumbent governor who is seen by 3 to 1 as being beholden to the oil companies, and his challenger who's seen by 3 to 1 as not being beholden to the oil companies.
Can we blame the oil companies on high interest rates?
How about a candidate for governor who favors increases in college tuitions at state universities? 23 more likely, 54 less likely to support such a guy. And because the basic tuition increases are just about as popular as tax increases. Conservatives are less likely, 46 to 28. Republicans are less likely, 44-33. So it's again, that's an issue where there are no conservatives. So and he was perceived as so that the tuition thing really hurts you. And when you combine that with his education position, at Clements, you really have something there that I think is worth going after. I'll wrap all this together at the end of this, but let me just give it to you one at a time. How about a candidate who receives large campaign contributions from oil companies? 17% more likely to vote for such a candidate, 59% less likely. Now, I don't get numbers like that in Massachusetts, okay, or in New York. I mean, I get about those numbers, 58 to 60% less likely. And among conservatives, they would be less likely by 45 to 25. And among rich people, they would be less likely 58 to 14. And Republicans would be less likely 38 to 26. So that nexus between the oil industry and the governor is just a beautiful one, and is one that is really worth working on and articulating, particularly in terms of utility rates and in terms of the whole concept of beholden. The notion one comes through with here is that the voters really see oil in this state in much the same way that they see casino gambling in Nevada. A homegrown evil that'll take over the state if we're not careful and run our lives for us. Or much the way that they see labor unions in Michigan. The outsized next-door neighbor that's gotten too big for his britches, and you have to be really careful about it. And I think and the point is that you really are dealing here with something which nobody else knows, which is that you can attack oil companies in Texas and live to tell about it, and do very well living to tell about it. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't get contributions from oil executives and stuff like that, but it does mean we should turn away contributions from oil PACs, if any would offer them, because I think that...
They probably won't do that
Yeah.
too much right after you
Yeah.
make the attack.
And the bank packs.
Pretty fast
Um,
to dry those up.
A candidate for governor who was endorsed by Reagan, 38% more likely, 35 less likely. So his endorsement splits about evenly. That'll change a lot between now and November '82, but it's an interesting initial reading. Now, the likelihood of voting,
Slight
You would say
dip
that-
in there.
it's even split right now, but it'll change a lot as we go.